Okay. Hello. Good morning. I'm Emily Johnson. I'm a member of UUS. My pronouns are she, her. In a moment, I'm going to introduce our panelists, but first we have some housekeeping for this morning. So if you're here in person, I would invite you to either turn off your phone or both silence it and turn off your Wi-Fi so that it doesn't interfere with the streaming or the Wi-Fi network. So a note about today's activities. Because we will be streaming the worship service from General Assembly at 11:30, our 10 o'clock activity today is a little different. We'll be having a panel discussion. So after the panel, will be a bring your own picnic brunch on the patio. So if you're at home and would like to join us, we anticipate that will begin by about 10:45 or so. And then at 11:30, we'll host a viewing party of the General Assembly service in the fellowship hall. If you'd like to watch it here, you can also stream that service on your own. So now, for our panel this morning, as Unitarian Universalists, we don't all believe the same things, but we look to 7 principles to guide our lives and actions. One of those principles is the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. One of the ways this principle is expressed is through the process of General Assembly. So I hope this panel can help people learn a little bit more about what General Assembly is, what it's like to participate as an individual and as a representative of the congregation. So first we'll start with a chalice lighting. This chalice lighting today is So That We Might Together Shine by Eric Walker Wickstrom. When we light our chalice, everyone focuses on the flame. Yet it is the paraffin of the candle, the cotton of the wick, the potassium chlorate and sulfur of the match, and the oxygen in the air around us that makes that flame possible. As leaders, we are not called to be a lone beacon on a hill. Rather, we are meant to work together so that we might together shine. Okay, so I'm going to ask our 2 panelists to come up and join me. So Dave and Diana are joining us this morning because they are both people who have attended General Assembly in the past. So I'm just going to ask you to just briefly introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about what that experience was like for you. And then just after they introduce themselves, we'll open it up for questions, both in person and online. And I do have a few questions to get us started if you need some time to think. So Dave and Diana, can you tell us, what I said before. One of you attended in the past. Sure, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Dave Martin. So I've been a member of this congregation for 48 years. I was thinking about it this morning. And over the years, I've been to 3 General Assemblies in person, and the last 2 have been virtual. And so part of my issue was I would have liked to have been to more General Assemblies, but they always happen in June every year, and during my working life, my main professional annual conference was in June, so I could never, and I was most of the time obligated to attend that rather than General Assembly. So it really wasn't until I retired that I was able to go to General Assembly, and I've been to 3 of them, one in Kansas City, one in Minneapolis, and one in Columbus, Ohio. So in the Midwest primarily. And the last 3 have been, 20 and 21, they did virtual only. So I don't think I did the one in 20, but in 21 I did it virtually, and then I did it virtually this last year. It's just ending up today. When I first went, my experience was it was like drinking from a fire hose, which you've heard, I'm sure you've all heard that expression. There was just so much going on, it's a little hard to take in. But I did, you kind of have to figure out which sessions you want to go to and what you want to spend your time at, and then kind of pick and choose carefully. Sometimes you think a session looks really good and it turns out to be not what you expected. So my plan was always to have a backup. If I didn't like this one, I'd go to the next one. This was in person. And they've usually been in, convention centers. They get, I don't know, 3,000 to 4,000 people, I think, normally in a meeting in person. Maybe a little more, depending on the city. Obviously, they're typically bigger. There's more attendance on the East Coast or the West Coast than there is in the Midwest, typically. And then this year, in Portland, it was the first time they've done what they call a multi-platform. So they had people in attendance, and they also had it virtually. So you could do either one, it seemed to work reasonably well. They had a lot of, as you might imagine, technical issues, which we've all experienced with Zoom or whatever platforms we're dealing with for meetings and stuff last year and the year before. And my sense this year, they've got a lot of that worked out, at least from their end. Things seem to work a little smoother. They use Zoom as a platform, and they also use another platform called Hova. It's WHOVA, that's more of a live streaming platform. And last year, the two didn't work real well together, and this year they seem to work a lot better, at least from my standpoint. So one of the things that they do they have workshops at a General Assembly. They start on Wednesday with a big celebration, and then they have workshops on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then they end on Sunday morning with a general worship service, which everybody can view later on this morning. And then, so you've got to pick and choose these workshops. They usually have a worship service every evening to kind of end things, and then they'll have speakers throughout, depending on what's going on. And one of the things they have a long-standing tradition of having something called the Ware Lecture, W-A-R-E. It was named after a person whose last name is Ware, and I don't know the whole history of that. But that's usually on Saturday night. So I've seen people like Brian Stevenson, who wrote Just Mercy and was instrumental in the Civil Rights Museum down in the South. I've seen Reverend William Barber, who was the leader of the Poor People's Campaign in the South the last few years. And then last night, they had Ibram Kendi, which hope some of you may be familiar with him. He wrote Stamped from the Beginning and How to Be an Anti-Racist, and he's had a lot of publicity lately. We just won a MacArthur Genius Grant in the last couple of years. So they did that last night with him, and it was interesting. And they did it at an interview, which I'd never seen them do before. The president of the UUA, Frederic Gray, thank you, interviewed him. So it wasn't really a talk; it was more of an interview, which was a little different format. I've been a delegate on most of the times I've been there, and I was this year too, and when I've been in person. And so each church can send so many delegates, depending on the number of members that you have. And I think we're eligible to send 6 or 7, I think, based on our membership. And that doesn't mean we always have 6 or 7 delegates, but we could send that many. And then those delegates participate in the business meetings of the General Assembly, which are held throughout there are several business meetings held throughout the time from Wednesday through Sunday. In the past, being a delegate was really a pain, because in person they were also doing programming workshops at the same time business meetings were going on. And so if you were a delegate and had to go to a business meeting, you'd miss some of the workshops, and that was always a hard choice sometimes, whether to go to the business meeting or to go to a workshop that you really wanted to go to. Now, and sometimes, even as a delegate, I chose to go to a workshop rather than go to a business meeting. So this year, for the first time, at least in my memory, I was doing it all virtually, but they had the business meetings at times when they weren't scheduling workshops at the same time as business meetings. So as you might imagine, the format has changed a little bit, and they're doing fewer workshops. And what they did this year, and I think they did it last year too, was they have a bunch of what they're calling on-demand videos for people who are registered, kind of pre-recorded presentations. Rather than having those people make the presentation at the General Assembly, they've been recorded ahead of time. So there were about, I don't know, 40 or 50 of them this year that you could look at, and you can look at after the fact as well, which I think, at least from my perspective, then cut down on the number of workshops that were actually at the General Assembly. Being there virtually is clearly not the same as being there in person, as you all, it's just like going to church virtually is not the same as being here in person, at least in my opinion. So I miss that, being in the group and with people and talking with people. And, it's like any other conference or meeting. A lot of the best conversations happen in the hallway. You meet somebody and you have a conversation, or you find somebody in a similar sized church and have a conversation with them. That's really hard to do virtually, I think. Now, they did some breakout rooms like we've done here with people, but it's clearly not the same. And this year, I was disappointed in a couple of things. There were a couple of workshops that I thought everything was going to be recorded, so anybody could look at it virtually, whether there were people there or not, or whether it was and it was also in person. But it turned out there were a number of them were not recorded and not going to be available virtually, that you just had to be there. And if I'd have paid attention to the program, it actually said in person only, and I wasn't paying attention to it. So anyway, there was one on the 8th, there was a number of workshops on the 8th principle that we've been dealing with here. And one of them I was disappointed that I didn't get to go to because it was in person only. Actually I did, and then so I couldn't go to that one, so I had to pick another one. And usually there are 4 or 5 workshops going on at the same time, so you got to pick one to go to. And I went to one about the history of Unitarian Universalism and the Eugenics movement, which I didn't know anything about. I knew about the Eugenics movement. I didn't know that there was a history of UUs and the Eugenics movement. And so it was really fascinating to me because the young woman who was doing the presentation is writing a dissertation on this from one of the universities on the East Coast, and she's done the research that a number of the leaders of the eugenics movement in the early 20th century were prominent Unitarians. And in fact, one of the leaders was the president of Harvard University, and he was a Unitarian. So that's part of our history. They were saying that we've got to come to terms with that, and that is part of our history. So that was new to me. That was something. So I always feel like I learned something new, and some stuff I've already known. You meet people in similar-sized churches, have similar kinds of issues going on. People in search for a minister. I remember back when we were doing the capital campaign, going to a couple of meetings at General Assembly on presentations about doing a capital campaign, and that's always a good thing to learn more about that, how other people have done it, and things that worked and things that didn't work. As I've been involved in racial justice over the last few years, there are usually workshops on racial justice issues, and hearing how people are dealing with those issues can be helpful. Again, things that worked, things that didn't work. So it's been I've enjoyed them. The criticism of General Assembly has been for years is that it's too expensive, because you've got to travel to a major city, and you've got to pay for a hotel and meals, and you got to pay for going to the conference as well. And most churches, I think not all of them, most churches, ours offers some financial help for people that may need it, but a lot of people can't afford to go. I mean, that's just the way it's been, and they're trying to figure out how to deal with that. Now, the fact that they're doing part of it virtually now, I think will mean that some people that maybe couldn't afford to travel to Portland could see it online. But you still got to pay a little bit to attend virtually. And they did some more this year. I know they did some things with you. If you were a delegate or just wanted to be a delegate, and that's all you wanted to do was go to attend the business meetings, you didn't virtually. You didn't have to pay anything, or you pay what you can, kind of thing. So they're trying to figure out, and they've been trying for years to figure out ways to make it more accessible. And as you might imagine, the General Assemblies in the past were predominantly a white denomination. So most of the people that could attend GAs in the past have been older white people. And that's getting better, I think. They're making more inroads, and there's certainly lots of people of color that are parts of our congregations around the country. And you see that at GA. I'm not saying it's entirely white, but that's generally been one of the criticisms. So they're making efforts to try to make it more accessible. And I think having it virtually will do that to a certain extent. People can't afford. I'll stop there.
Okay. Well, I attended GA for the first time in 2021, virtually, from June 23rd through the 27th. And I wanted to go because I had begun my term as a board trustee, so I felt it was really important for me to get some understanding how the General Assembly works and about UU in general, the internal and the overall perspective of what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist. There was an orientation training for all the delegates about how to vote electronically. And some of just the process of getting in and learning how to vote electronically was in the beginning sort of it caused there was few glitches there, but eventually I figured it out. There was a candidate forum on the second day for the board candidates, the nominating committee, and the Midwest UU Conference Board. And following that forum, all of the delegates had to vote. On the third day, the focus was on proposed bylaw amendments and unincorporated amendments. And there was a lot of discussion during those sessions. And the delegates finally voted on actions of immediate witness, the timeline for the president-elect to take office, and the RE credentialing levels. And some of the items passed that related to the actions of immediate witness included defending trans and non-binary folks and intersex communities, working to stop suppression and partnering with voting rights multiracial communities, and helping to reform the health care, and also focusing on how to help go forward with universal health care, which is needed because we see what happened with the COVID pandemic. One of the concerns that came up was how the actions of immediate witness has a history of not being accountable to BIPOC community in everyday dealings, and this lack of focus has not addressed equity. As far as how I felt I benefited from attending GA, I enjoyed the discussions around the resolutions submitted by the Article 2 Study Commission. That discussion was extremely lively. Is centered around including clear language in the principal section about accountable systemic anti-racist and anti-oppression actions are required to build a beloved community as part of what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist. As a delegate, I had the opportunity to vote yes on this, and it turned out that this resolution got a 91% vote. And that's why it's important to be there, so that you can actually vote on these issues that are, that concern us. This vote is essential as we work to grow our own congregation. And this has been a part of our board discussion, and one of the reasons the board instituted the BGI subcommittee. The challenge, he spoke to about one of the challenges, the cost. and the travel, but because it's virtually, that was a good move. And now they got a multi-platform where you can either go in person or virtually. That's a double good thing. Lessons I learned. I had the opportunity to listen to positions and proposals, and I had opportunity either to confirm or not confirm an amendment. I felt needed as a delegate, and that my vote really mattered. As a society, we need to have follow-up meetings with the attendees. When we attend the GA assembly, we need to have meetings like this or other meetings in small group to talk about what we've learned and talk about all the interesting conversations and the fun workshops, the great music, the guest speakers. Everything is just fabulous. So we need to have the opportunity to share that with our congregation. Dave talked about some of the workshops that you can attend. I attended one workshop, was about reparations, and in that particular workshop, they clarified that reparations is about repair. It's not about receiving unearned money, nor is it about monetary handouts. Reparations is about repair for crimes against humanity perpetrated on African Americans and the kinds of crimes committed from the end of chattel slavery until the present day. Reparations is not about revenge. In that workshop, it says it's not about revenge. We do not want to harm this great nation in any way. The goal is a sacred one that honors the lives of our fathers, our mothers, our uncles, our aunts and grandparents, our cousins, nieces, nephews, etc. And so on until we completely honor their spirit's endurance. This endurance of torture, death, betrayals, and terror, and other more unspeakable acts of inhumanity. Their endurance allowed them to stay alive and bring our lives and souls into this world we find ourselves today. We are still our white brothers and sisters. Nothing can or will change that. And so those were the two things. I thought it was a really interesting workshop on reparations, because I know a lot of times people think it's only about trying to give money to black folks. Yeah.
All right, thank you both so much. So I have some follow-up questions that I'll start with, but again, if you're online and want to put a question in the chat, I will be monitoring the chat online, and then Kira has a microphone. If anyone here has questions, just raise your hand and the microphone will come to you. But I'll start with a couple. Oh yeah, go for it. Absolutely.
I forgot to mention, at every General Assembly, they have usually on the Thursday evening, they have something called the Service of the Living Tradition, which is a worship service, and it's a time to recognize all the ministers in the country who have received preliminary fellowship or final fellowship, all the religious education professionals who have received certain credentials, and then to recognize all the ministers who have died in the last year. And so this year, our minister, Reverend Diana Smith, was recognized as having received her final fellowship. So she was recognized among the whole group and got to parade across the stage and receive her handshake or certificate. So I wanted to mention that.
Question I have, you talked a little bit about what types of things you voted on as a delegate. I'm curious how being a delegate of UUS informs how you vote. Do you vote purely according to your sort of individual experience and beliefs and experience in that debate that's happening, or is it informed in part also by by representing the congregation, if that makes sense?
It's as a delegate, I'm voting my conscience. And that's the way we've traditionally done it here. I don't know this for a fact, but I don't think the board has ever our board has ever said a delegate has to vote a certain way on a certain issue. I don't think that's happened. So delegates are generally, now, and that's not the case all over the country. There may be cases where if a board decides they want their delegates to vote a certain way, they may do that, but that's not happened here that I'm aware of.
And I also wanted to mention, I don't know if either of you has it available. Diana mentioned the actions of immediate witness from last year, and there were 3 actions of immediate witness also approved this year, although they are escaping my memory. I know one was about reproductive health.
Yeah, they did. They voted on 3 actions of immediate witness. So AIW, if you hear that acronym, and they voted to move these forward, which means that they're encouraging congregations to study these issues and talk about them. One that fits in with what Diana just said, on anti-racism and reparations via restorative justice, and I'm not going to read the whole thing. That's one of them. The second one was stop the privatization of Medicare, and the third one was you'll get this one. We do not consent, rejecting legal challenges to abortion. So those had all been kind of decided on ahead of time, or there'd been discussion ahead of time, and then there was discussion during the meetings, and the delegates voted they had to have, I don't know, certain percentage, I guess, in favor of them to vote them forward, and that they'll be studied over the next year. So obviously the abortion one was a hot topic, and there was a lot of discussions going on, and during one of the meetings, they announced that the Supreme Court had voted to overturn Roe v. Wade. So they stopped the meeting and had some discussion about that. As you can imagine, there were lots of discussions during the week about that, about how to proceed, how to deal with that. And based on what Diana said too, these actions of immediate witness. There's no reason we couldn't. These are forward now, so they're asking congregations to study them or talk about them, and there's no reason we couldn't do that here. Have forums, or after church service or online or whatever, to talk about some of these issues.
I just want to say one thing. Since you brought up that, in this congregation or this society has been a white congregants, but within the society now there are other groups of people, and they now have different kinds of committees. These other committees they have based on one's ethnic group, and so at the GA, these different groups virtually, they were meeting and talking to each other. They learned each other's names. And you can address that. You could talk to people at any time, but they also have formal discussion time where people could come and talk to each other about any issue or anything that was going on. So I found that really interesting that people could, you found it, because people nowadays, I'm not a tech person, but how people can show their faces, and then you can talk to the people. They had all that kind of stuff going on.
And that was virtual?
Yeah.
And that was new this year? Yeah. That's interesting, okay. The other question I had is, as far as the sessions, outside of the business meeting, but the actual sessions, you both kind of touched on a couple that you've attended. Do they tend to be sort of a lecture format? Do they tend to be more roundtable? Does it just kind of depend on the topic?
Well, the one I attended were both. Some were lectures. You could watch the video and you saw the lecture. But then they had some where it was just like, we have here, when they put you into a little room,
Mm-hmm.
You're talking to each other.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a mix. Some of them are just one person presenting to the group, and then there's questions and answers, and some of them are panelists, maybe 3 or 4 people that are presenting a panel discussion. So it's a mix of ways to do it.
Have you found that that's changed between the in-person, solely in-person, and then the sort of multi-platform or solely virtual?
Yeah, if you were, so I'm trying to think of the one on, the one I looked at on the specific one I mentioned about UU history and eugenics was one woman presenting, but she was online, and there were a group of people in person. So, I mean, it was that format.
Any other questions from anyone else? I still have some, but yeah. We'll give you a mic. Hold on a sec.
Going back to the workshops that David was talking about, are those mostly about governance within the community, or do they ever bring in those social issues and social actions that Diana was talking about with her groups?
Last few years, it's been more social issues rather than governance issues. Now, and I think that's been a shift to me over the years, that there's less on governance issues and more on social issues. I brought a printout of some of the workshops, and so just as an example, the one on eugenics obviously is one. Advancing racial justice through our investments, co-creating community ministry in your congregation, holding fast, living through collective trauma, several sessions on UU the Vote, which has been prominent the last couple of years, creating climate justice on an international stage. This is the one I wanted to go to, but I didn't get to. Neuroethics, evidence-based practices for anti-oppression. I don't know what neuroethics is, but it sounded intriguing to me. Accountability, justice, and wholeness, UU theologies of liberation. So very, very few. I think that's a great question, because I think that's been a shift. There's very little on how to be a treasurer, how to be a board member, or how boards work. There may be some, but it's. And then some of the ones, and as I mentioned, they had these on-demand videos that were available ahead of time and afterwards. Immigration, religious diversity, and the limits of pluralism. Incarcerated Unitarian Universalists, prison ministry. Include Islam in your UU sources of inspiration. Our vision for a radical mental health community. I'm just looking through these. There's very little on governance. So I think that's been a shift. Thanks.
I'm going to stand up and talk a little bit, because I've just spent the last week basically involved in being a delegate for this congregation. I know I'm new to this congregation. I'm Donna Simonton. But I have been to probably 6 GAs live and attended the last 2 years virtually. And just a few comments. It's not a white denomination anymore. The last 2 years, and especially this year, shows the diversity that I've never imagined that I would see within the denomination. And it's really quite amazing. I would encourage all of you to visit uua.org/GA to get a taste of what's different and exciting this year. It really is such a huge difference to be able to do it virtually. You can come and go. You can, as a virtual participant, even if you are not a registered participant, get into the virtual line. If something's being discussed, 2 minutes of presentation about what it's about, and then pro and con lines that you can do live or virtually. This congregation did assist anyone who wanted to be a delegate if you needed assistance. To be virtual as a delegate, it was $250, and I received a partial scholarship, and I'm very thankful for that. In terms of voting, I think over the years I've learned that I listen much more carefully to the conversations within the congregation so that my vote reflects my leanings, but if I hear from the whole congregation or from other people, I may vote not my heart, but I'll put up some questions to the group for discussion. So that to me is the biggest difference between virtual and being there live, although I certainly enjoyed those special services. And the other thing I realized, being a UU for such a long time, is I was watching some of the delegates and people who were running office. There was a young woman who said she was going to her 14th GA. And I thought, I must know her because I was in that church when she was there. And yes, it was the same young lady. She's married and grown up now, and very much a part of the denomination. So some of those watching up and growing ups and getting to know the issues, and your question about policy, this is a year where there have been a number of reports about how the denomination is structured. It's being reconfigured and restructured, and one of the biggest discussions was whether or not to take basically a 3-year hiatus from moving forward with some organizational things so that some really, some things that have been passed that need time to grow within a much more diverse congregation and movement, so these things can happen and be evaluated properly. So I took a lot of time, but I really wanted to share these things with you, as well as the folks up there. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
And one thing that brought to mind for me too, we looked at attending this year, and obviously I am not there, but they did have the option for childcare. That kind of reminded me, speaking about, a young person, if you were attending, they did have the option that you could have childcare available to you. So I thought that was interesting as far as accessibility goes. Okay. Any other questions? I think we have time for maybe one more question. Otherwise, I'll just ask everyone to thank our panelists and our contributions from the audience. And yeah, thank you, Dave and Diana, for sharing your experiences. Before we go or continue into our other activities, I just wanted to remind everyone our community partner agency this month is Table to Table. Table to Table keeps wholesome edible food from going to waste by collecting it from donors and distributing to those in need through agencies that serve the hungry, homeless, and at-risk populations. Since they began in 1996, Table to Table volunteers have rescued and distributed over 25 million pounds of food to area agencies. So there are the usual instructions on the screen if you'd like to give online, or you can also, donate to fulfill your pledge, donate to operating expenses, and yes, all right. So again, immediately after this, you're welcome to join in community and conversation. If you're online, the chat rooms will be available, and there should be information in the chat about that on Zoom. If you're here in person, you're welcome to join in conversation in the fellowship hall or out on the patio. If you are doing the bring your own picnic, that will be out on the patio. And then at 11:30, if you would like to watch the service from General Assembly, the worship of service, there will be video in the fellowship hall available, or you can also just watch online from wherever you would choose. So please join me for in the words for extinguishing the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. All these we carry in our hearts and in our minds until we are together again.
Next year, the GA is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
All right, go enjoy this beautiful day. Oh, jeez. Thank you so much. That was great.